National Geographic entered the intriguing world of Hollywood scripted dramas with their 2017 release of Genius, a story centered around the early life of Albert Einstein. Steve Green reviewed the work for IndieWire, giving it a B- while informing readers that Genius is most compelling as the origins of a man who would achieve greatness, rather than an attempt to wedge that greatness into an otherwise normal young adulthood. With shades of a college romance drama, a case study in political resistance, and a dash of spy thriller thrown in for good measure, it's a show that has one of history's biggest personalities to build around. But like so many other outsized historical figures, it's an anchor that requires careful handling. If made too large, it has the tendency to drag everything else down with it. Geniuses, like Albert Einstein, are the equivalent of real-life superheroes, individuals who exist on a different plane of existence from the rest of us mere mortals. Men and women who have literally altered the course of history, oftentimes saving tens of thousands, if not millions, through their sheer brilliance. However, it's important to draw the distinction between geniuses and prodigies. Men and women who at an early age show the potential of becoming living gods within their chosen field. Unfortunately, not every prodigy manages to achieve the senior rank. Subsequently, not all geniuses began their journeys as prodigies destined to change the world. While every good superhero tends to have an extensive tragedy in their childhood, many real-life heroes lived out their early lives in the most unassuming way. Some, like Einstein, were merely simple boys living amongst relatively simple parents, absolutely terrified for their upcoming academic tests. Einstein's childhood is not the tragic tale of Bruce Wayne witnessing the death of his parents, nor was it learning that with great power comes great responsibility after encountering a radioactive spider. If I was forced to pick any superhero origin story to compare to Einstein's real-life one, I would argue that his upbringing resembled that of Clark Kent, the alien who would take up the mantle of Superman. As a young boy, Clark grew up in rural Smallville, entirely unaware of his abilities, sheltered by his overly protective adopted grandparents. Gradually, he became cognizant of his powers and used them to establish himself as a benevolent god amongst the mere mortals that inhabited our planet. Throughout this 6-part series, I will introduce you to the man that Albert Einstein was, and describe for you the substantial ways in which he influenced history. Taking up such a task will obviously require us to discuss his scientific breakthroughs, but I want to make clear my intention to take a relatively shallow approach towards his scientific and mathematical accomplishments. There are a couple of reasons for this. One such happens to be the vivid memory of the first time that I ever saw an F next to a test with my name on it. It was sophomore year in chemistry, and the worst part of seeing that letter grade was the fact that I 100% thought I had aced that test. Typically, when students fail something, they know what they don't know. In this instance, however, I was completely unaware that I evidently knew quite little. The second reason that I won't go deep down the scientific well is because my math skills are currently at a 8th grade level. They used to be at the college calculus level, but despite what every single one of my math teachers told me about how much I will use this stuff in the real world, my prior knowledge has decayed from entropy quite quickly. How do I know that I'm back at the 8th grade level? That's the grade that my eldest child is in, and with a lot of help from YouTube, I'm still able to occasionally assist her on her homework. Furthermore, I've read some of the letters sent by George Ellery Hale, an American astrophysicist and contemporary of Einstein. Hale was in his own field universally recognized as a genius for the work that he accomplished. including his discovery of magnetic fields in sunspots, his position as a leading designer in a number of world-leading telescopes, and his role in establishing Caltech as a world-class scientific research hub. But when confronted by Einstein's theory of relativity in 1920, Hale privately confessed that the complications of the theory of relative are altogether too much for my comprehension. If I were a good mathematician, I might have some hope of forming a feeble conception of the principle, but as it is, I fear it will always remain beyond my grasp. In an attempt to not get out over my skis, I will focus on the historical figure that was Einstein, while letting the experts teach both of us the science that gave Einstein the power to literally invent universes. You're listening to Empires, Anarchy, and Other Notable Moments, a podcast designed for deep dives that assist in the teaching of history. This series is about the man who remains synonymous with the term genius, Albert Einstein. Episode number 1, Little Einstein. The world didn't shudder upon the arrival of the individual that many would argue is perhaps the greatest mind ever produced. That isn't just conjecture, as Nobel Prize-winning Soviet physicist Lev Landau created a scientific scale designed to rank the greatest physicists. After designing it to account for bias, the Soviet named Einstein as the greatest of the 20th century minds, but noted that his formula would have placed Isaac Newton on the same level. It's fitting that the two ought to be held up on the pedestal together, as Einstein's biggest breakthrough would replace Newton's understanding of the universe around us. But on March 14, 1879, there was no sign that the Newtonian world was going to be turned upside down by the birth of a young Jewish boy in Ulm, Germany. 11 years earlier, Minister Frederick Henry Hedge would write a long-form essay titled Characteristics of Geniuses. Having not yet been born, Einstein is obviously absent from Hedge's work, which includes references to Newton, Martin Luther, Kepler, Charlemagne, and Copernicus. One of the things that the minister makes clear in his work is that geniuses should be carefully discriminated from talent, with which it is apt to be confused. Talent sometimes culminates into the altitude of genius, but is never at home on those august heights. Talent is some one faculty unusually developed. Genius commands all the faculties. The one is a distinct quality, the other the entire man. Talent manufactures, genius creates. Ever since the concept of a genius emerged in the 18th century, we have been working in order to produce the next great man or woman destined to change the world. Incredibly, we appear to be on the precipice of scientifically manufacturing talent. CRISPR technology promises that for the right cost, you can medically engineer the fetus in your womb to be endowed with certain traits: height, stronger bone density, a reduced chance of contracting sickle cell anemia and other genetic diseases. In some ways, this is already happening without the scientists rummaging around your womb. The kids of professional athletes already have their parents' genes passed down to them, while others who haven't yet achieved the heights of stardom are spending untold amounts of money meticulously grooming their children to live out their own unrealized dreams. Can the same thing happen in the world of science? Can two talented physicists make eye contact through the beakers that they're holding and in a moment of passion pass down their science genes to their offspring in order to advance the world order? Not in the case of Einstein. His father was Hermann Einstein, a man who got his first professional job as a featherbed salesman before later running a small repair shop. His mother, Pauline Koch, ran the family household, taking care of Albert as well as his younger sister, Maria. It turns out that this particular genius was of peasant stock. But he did happen to be born in the right place and at the right time. The city of Ulm took great pride in its academic record, with a slogan that proclaimed, "The people of Ulm are mathematicians." There's a widespread belief that geniuses aren't born, they're nurtured. If that were the case, Ulm represented Einstein's Smallville, the place where he was safely nurtured until his powers emerged. This democratization of genius lends hope to every parent that if they just raise their child right, that they too could produce the next great physicist, artist, or war strategist. For many parents, that is the ultimate goal, with the Chronicle of Higher Education noting that in societies increasingly reluctant to treat noble birth and privilege as a legitimate basis for establishing social hierarchies, intelligence and creativity served as new criteria to justify human distinction, with the genius singled out as a member of what contemporaries called a natural aristocracy. Having been born to a city that prides its ability to produce mathematicians would have been the perfect nurturing ground for Albert Einstein. Born a peasant, he would go on to rise up and rule this natural aristocracy because of the opportunities afforded to him. But this simplistic answer isn't the correct one, as Einstein only remained in the city of Ulm while he was an infant. Within a year of his birth, the family was forced to move to the far more industrial city of Munich after Hermann's small business had failed. Attempting to restart as a family, Albert's dad began to work with his brother who ran an electrochemical shop. The rural peasant family must have felt as though they were fish out of water upon arriving in the big city of Munich. For one thing, the metropolis was overwhelmingly Catholic, causing the Jewish Einsteins to immediately stand out. While some physical features of their ethnicity would have been noticed, the family's Jewish faith didn't play a part in separating the family from the city's Catholics. This was because Hermann believed that all religions, including the Jewish faith, was nothing more than ancient superstition. This meant that Albert was raised in a Jewish home that didn't attend a synagogue, hold reverence to any of the high holy days, or restrain from delicious bacon. It turned out to be a fateful decision, as his father's willingness to go against the grain helped to form the core of Albert's personality. Historian Ronald Clark writes that Einstein was nourished on a family tradition which had broken with authority, which disagreed, sought independence, had deliberately trodden out of line. This willingness to go outside of the system more than any other encapsulates what was so different about this genius from the thousands of others that the modern world has bestowed the title upon. He was an anarchist that found a way to work within the established system. Tom Seiler is the author of the book Think Like a Genius, the ultimate user's manual for your brain. He, along with thousands of others, utilizes the term genius lavishly in order to sell what he would proclaim are innovative learning materials, which will help unlock the inherent abilities of your child. Seiler elucidates his philosophy that anyone can be a genius by writing that we have been taught that a genius is someone who knows how to think deeply and with originality, an advanced thinker with an expansive mind, such as Plato, Aristotle, or Leonardo da Vinci. We have not been taught that alongside our most celebrated geniuses, there are legions of everyday geniuses. They're not people who are mental giants, nor are they intellectual heroes. Their theories and inventions don't change cultures or civilizations, but they have all experienced flights of exceptional thinking, often in some highly practical way, such as the genius behind the invention of paper, Velcro, staples, nails, steel, glass, cement, currency, and other remarkably simple but useful things. Now, I love the sound of Velcro tearing as much as the next guy, but to anoint George de Mestral, a Swiss engineer, as a genius for wondering to himself why burrs stuck to his pants during hikes is a step further than I'm willing to go. Despite nearly every preschool today advertising that it will provide the nurturing environment that is proven to produce geniuses, Einstein struggled in his early education. He attended a Catholic school because it was geographically convenient for the family. As a secular Jew, he would have stood out among his classmates immediately. Clark informs us that nothing in Einstein's early history suggests dormant genius. Quite the contrary, the one feature of his childhood about which there appears no doubt is the lateness with which he learned to speak. Even at the age of 9, he was not fluent. He would reply to questions only after consideration and reflection. His parents feared that he might be subnormal, and it has even been suggested that in his infancy he may have suffered from a form of dyslexia. When Hermann Einstein asked his son's headmaster what profession his son should adopt, the answer was simply, "It doesn't matter. He'll never make a success of anything." Another instance where the word genius is loosely thrown about comes from the musical instrument industry, which proudly touts studies in neuroscience which shows that music can enhance brain function in children. The long-running children's show Little Einsteins directly conflates the belief that genius and music go hand in hand. There may be something to that, as Albert picked up the violin at the urging of his parents when he was a mere 5 years old. It would prove to be one of the great loves of his life. He used it not only as an entryway to the deep recesses of his mind for periods of intense thought, but also for picking up girls while he was in college. He spent 3 years at the Catholic school close to his house. While he certainly didn't fail, he also didn't show significant promise in the eyes of any of his teachers. They weren't idiots back then, but thanks to modern classification systems, we have a better understanding regarding Albert's difficulty at school. Elite students tend to fall into 2 distinct categories that can, but don't often, overlap. In the courses that I excelled at, teachers would have identified me as a high achiever. These students attempt to achieve high marks as well as praise from the teachers by fully completing or going above and beyond on their work. These are the students who do the extra credit assignments despite already having an A+ in the class. High ability students, on the other hand, are students who are simply more advanced than their peers. These individuals oftentimes don't have to study or even appear to try hard in order to perform well on the assessments. In the modern-day classroom setting, however, many high-ability students end up with scores in the C range on their report cards because they often don't see the value in completing work which they sincerely believe is beneath their ability. The ideal student is a mixture of both high achievement and high ability. Kids who are clearly advanced and ready for a faster, more complex way of learning, but willing to put in the work that the teacher assigns them. Scientific American analyzed a 45-year-long study which focused on early identification of potential geniuses in the realms of math and science. Julian Stanley began the study after meeting Joseph Bates. a classic example of a high-ability student. Bates was so far ahead of his classmates that he began taking a computer science course at Johns Hopkins University when he was 12. He was afforded the opportunity because his father happened to work there. Privilege often has its benefits at maintaining those who are already on top. Stanley was curious how many other young men and women of extraordinary ability were out there, but hadn't been afforded such an opportunity for growth. He developed a test designed to locate students of profound potential within the STEM fields. A sort of Charles Xavier, looking for a set of X-Men whose only mutant powers was solving algebraic equations. The article states that, as the longest-running concurrent longitude survey of intellectually talented children, the study of mathematically precocious youth has for 45 years tracked the careers and accomplishments of some 5,000 individuals, many of whom have gone on to become high-achieving scientists. The study's ever-growing data set has generated more than 400 papers and several books, and provided key insights into how to spot and develop talent in science, technology, engineering, mathematics, and beyond. Had such standardized testing been around, there is a chance that Einstein's early gifts would have been recognized, and his rudimentary lessons adjusted. All he had, however, were teachers that thought that this boy who could hardly read was lazy, and parents who failed to recognize a spark of genius within their own child. That moment of inspiration finally came when Albert was shown his father's magnetic pocket compass when he was just 5 years old. Compasses use the Earth's magnetic field to always point north. It wasn't a new invention, as compasses had been used more than 2,000 years ago during the Han Dynasty of China, and the invention appeared in Europe by 1190. But to the young child, it was as though he was witnessing true magic. As the legend claims, the 5-year-old boy vigorously shook his father's compass, hoping against hope that he could fool the needle. Rather than growing bored with the device or blindly accepting that it always points north because it does, Einstein developed his first themata, which is a fancy way of saying a subject worthy of deep discourse and thought. To Albert, the invisible force that guided the compass needle served as evidence to his young mind that there was more to our world than meets the eye, that there was something, in his own words, behind things, something deeply hidden. The fact that it was hidden within plain sight, in the literal space of his own bedroom, working to ensure that the needle stayed focused on Earth, made him wonder about what existed within these spaces that others incorrectly assumed were empty. His uncle helped to spark some of Albert's mathematical abilities, with the genius recalling that when he was a young boy, his uncle would stop by proclaiming that algebra is a merry science, in which we go hunting for a little animal whose name we don't know, so we call it X. When we bag our game, we pounce on it, and we give it its right name. Additionally, the boy's uncle on his mother's side gifted him a steam engine model. 30 years later, Einstein was still able to draw it in intricate detail from memory. These sparks of curiosity were almost destroyed before they could develop into self-sustaining infernos that would burn down the established scientific world. When he was 9.5, Albert transferred schools to the nearby Luitpold Gymnasium. Although quite a few of us remember our middle school years as a disaster, it isn't conjecture to claim that this would be the first true dark period in the young man's life. The school wasn't bad, as it was designed to provide for the children of the middle-class families of Munich. Its methods, however, were designed for high-achieving students, rather than those with high ability. Specifically, it preached methods of rote memorization throughout its curriculum. Similar practice and then repeat methods had initially made Einstein hate the violin. Now it threatened to come for math. There have long been rumors swirling that Albert Einstein was a terrible student. But looking at the historical record, one finds that his struggles were with authority rather than academics. His sister Maja tells us that the military tone of the school, the systematic training and the worship of authority that was supposed to accustom pupils at an early age to military discipline, was also particularly unpleasant for the boy. He contemplated with dread that not too distant moment when he will have to don a soldier's uniform to fulfill his military obligations. That seems like an odd fear for a young man daydreaming during a Latin lecture, but keep in mind that Germany only formed as a nation-state in 1871. The country was less than 20 years old when Albert Einstein entered one of its many gymnasiums. Debates regarding what the nation would look like were still fresh in the memories of the adults teaching at the school. Friedrich Karl von Moser was one of the early German nationalists who succeeded in infusing the new nation with a hardened militaristic attitude regarding its neighbors. Such an infusion was necessary in his mind as the newly formed Germans lacked a national way of thinking. This resulted in the creation of a society who elevated military service to elite status and bureaucratically designed the rest of their world to revolve around their newly minted standing army. Everything helped to reinforce the rigid discipline that is needed to maintain the command structure that is fundamental to the success of modern warfare. Historians Stephen Kroll and Kirsten Kruger reveal to us that militarism went in line with the creation of a bureaucracy. Fiscalism and statism as important forces in the process of separating themselves from other nations. In this period, it served as a socially progressive force, reduced the application of violence within the population, and led to an orderly and goal-oriented cooperation of many individuals with very different personal interests with a prioritized goal, without any consideration for the individual. That last part is the key to unlocking the reasons behind the struggles of Einstein during this period. He was an individual first. Historian David Cassidy tells us that at home, Albert obediently completed his homework before engaging in solitary games. One of his favorite pastimes as a child was constructing houses of cards, which sometimes were able to reach 4 stories. Even as a young child, Einstein valued solitude, and in 1930 he would reflect, "I am truly a lone traveler and have never belonged to my country, my home, my friends, or even my immediate family with my whole heart. In the face of all these ties, I have never lost a sense of distance and a need for solitude, feelings which increase with the years." This doesn't need to elicit a sigh, followed by a comment such as, "What a poor, lonely child." Einstein was largely content with who he was, utterly comfortable in his own skin. He just never felt the need to conform to the expectation of others. Cassidy continues by reminding us that his primary school classes emphasized memorization and learning by rote. Albert was reprimanded by his German elementary school teachers for thinking too much about the meaning of their questions and failing to produce responses as quickly as his peers. He wanted to know why, but his teachers only cared if he could produce the correct answer. Clark suggests that his lack of religious upbringing as an ethnic Jew had something to do with the formation of the individual who was endlessly searching for the why. The historian suggests that his need of something to fill the void, The desperate need to find order in a chaotic world may possibly have been a particularly Jewish need. Israeli ambassador Abba Eban adds context for us, stating that the Hebrew mind has been obsessed for centuries by a concept of order and harmony in the universal design. The search for laws hitherto unknown which govern cosmic forces, the doctrine of a relative harmony in nature, the idea of a calculable relationship between matter and energy, these are all more likely to emerge from a basic Hebrew philosophy and turn of mind than from many others. Historian Abraham Peiss recalls for us one preserved recollection of Einstein in class, writing that, at the gymnasium, a teacher once said to him that he, the teacher, would be much happier if the boy were not in his class. Einstein replied that he had done nothing wrong. The teacher answered, "Yes, that is true, but you sit there in the back row and smile, and that violates the feeling of respect that a teacher needs from his class." Dealing with students who were born into the era of cell phones, I would be more than happy to have my most troublesome student sitting and smiling at me while I lectured. Even in the modern age, teachers struggle with students who are ahead of their peers. When you have 30 students in a class, it's impossible to cater to the needs of each individual. And while a few motivated students will follow your advice to look deeper through their own private studies, the vast majority of students will nod their heads and then wander down the endless abyss that is TikTok. Albert's teachers believed that, like push-ups, the best way to train your mind was through continuous repetition. They were the type of teacher that assigned you 100 math problems for homework. That type of workload may be necessary for a few, but for Einstein it was needless repetition. Once you understood how to do the problem and were able to apply the concept to similar problems, there was no need to prove that you could. Later in life, he would describe for us the effect it had on him, noting that the worst thing seems to be for a school principally to work through methods of fear, force, and artificial authority. Such treatment destroys the healthy feelings, the integrity, and self-confidence of the pupils. All that it produces is a servile worker. The one teacher whom he connected with was his social studies teacher, a man named Roos. In Einstein's own words, he was the only man in the entire gymnasium that wasn't expecting his students to be as obedient as a corpse. Albert Einstein didn't even stand out for this teacher, however, as he called upon him at his house after achieving fame within the scientific community. The meeting didn't go as planned, as the elderly Roos didn't recognize him, and when prompted with his visitor's name, didn't recollect it. Rather than beating a dead horse, the world-renowned physicist just said, "Good day," and walked out. It turns out that even his best memories of this time were corrupted. His saving grace came from an unlikely friendship between the 12-year-old Einstein and Max Talmy, a Jewish medical student. Talmy frequented Einstein's family home while taking classes in Munich. He reveals to us that the boy showed a particular inclination towards physics and took pleasure in conversing on physics phenomenon. I therefore gave him reading matter. A. Bernstein's popular books on physical science and L. Buchnar's Force and Matter, two works that were quite popular in Germany. The boy was profoundly impressed by them. Bernstein's work especially, which describes physical phenomena lucidly and engagingly, had a great influence on Albert and enhanced his interests in physical science. Mathematics books would follow, and Talmy would check on Albert's progress during weekly visits. He continued, after a short time, a few months, he had worked through the whole book of Speaker. He thereupon devoted himself to higher mathematics, studying all by himself. Soon the flight of his mathematical genius was so high that I could no longer follow. Thereafter, philosophy was often a subject of our conversations. I recommended to him the reading of Kant. At that time, he was still a child, only 13 years old, yet Kant's works, incomprehensible to ordinary mortals, seemed to be clear to him. One of the reasons that the philosopher would have resonated so strongly with this young reader is encapsulated in his quote, "To have trained one's children is not enough. What really matters is that they learn to think." According to Kant, this occurs through wonder and excitement of what is out there and what motivates us to think for ourselves about something in nature so that we can properly learn and comprehend. Having now exercised his mind in order to create a school of his own with the world's most renowned scholars as his personal teachers, having already digested college textbooks, it's no wonder why the young boy was just sitting in the back of his classroom smiling at his teacher. But it didn't stop him from asking life's most important question of why. The physicists, mathematicians, and philosophers that he read were all searching for answers to that question. Kant wanted to understand the natural world, but understood that it was likely impossible to fully comprehend metaphysics, which is a branch of philosophy that deals with the first principles of things, including abstract concepts such as being, knowing, substance, cause, identity, time, and most importantly to the 12-year-old German boy digesting the works of Kant, space. The physicist would later on in life describe his gradual revelation that logic and order could be found through science rather than religion. Theologic belief in a higher power can be a wonderful thing, and there are countless examples of individuals being saved on earth through their belief in some grand design that they couldn't begin to fathom. But religion tends to mute the question of why. That process begins during a kid's religious doctrination, where the answer always ends the same way, because God wanted it that way. But why did he want it that way? Many of us merely accept the truth that our religion sells, that God is a higher power who loves us, created us, and has a plan for us. If he wanted us to know why he did something the way that he had, then he would tell us. The phony war between religion and science often includes the latter lobbying the insult that only science can prove itself to be true. Yet there are billions of religious adherents who believe in miracles and testaments that serve as their proof of God's existence. Rather than being introduced to a system of faith, Einstein was programmed by his dad from the beginning to be skeptical of finding life's answers at a synagogue or church. Although Kant warned him that it was impossible to ever know the answers to the big metaphysical questions that surround us, Albert Einstein conjured the memory of the compass that he had played with as a 5-year-old. In that moment, he had discovered that there was something all around him that had been previously hidden. What else could be discovered if one continued to interrogate why? He stomached his classes at the gymnasium, smiling away and finishing the busy work assigned to him to get decent grades. Then once home, he would begin again his real education. He claims that he barely survived the gymnasium, stating for the record that it is in fact nothing short of a miracle that the modern methods of instruction have not yet entirely strangled the holy curiosity of inquiry. Things got worse for him at the age of 16, when his dad and uncle's shop went under. His parents moved to Italy to pursue a new business venture and were forced to leave their son within a boarding house so that he could finish his education, then join his father to work in the repair shop. Even at this stage in his life, his parents couldn't comprehend the brilliance of their eldest child. After watching his parents depart, the teen put a desperate plan into action, securing a doctor's permission to withdraw from school on the pretext of mental exhaustion. His sister explains to us Albert's desperation to join his parents in Italy before he turned 17, as the German citizenship laws declared that a male citizen must not emigrate after his completed 16th year. Otherwise, if he failed to report for military service, he would be declared a deserter. Thus, he left the gymnasium with an incomplete education and no diploma to show for the countless hours that he had gritted his teeth and completed worksheets that he knew were beneath him. Contrary to common myths, he didn't fail out of school. In fact, testimony to his ability was required from his math teacher before his exodus from Luitpold was allowed. According to his permanent record, Einstein was expelled from the gymnasium with the official reason being written up as, "Your presence in the class is disruptive and affects the other students." Clark attributes this portion of Albert's successful plan to escape the school by writing that Einstein was the boy who knew not merely which monkey wrench to throw in the works, but also how best to throw it. Upon hearing that he was expelled, one imagines that he didn't let the door hit him on the way out. Little is known about the next 2 years of his life living with his parents in Italy, but all of the sources agree that Albert Einstein was happy. So why spend so much time on this portion of the physicist's life? First of all, education is one of the passions of my life, and knowing about the challenges that he faced within the classroom helps to inform other teachers that, in the words of Einstein, everybody is a genius. But if you judge a fish by its ability to climb a tree, it will live its whole life believing that it's stupid. Secondly, the vice that was the Luitpold Gymnasium created the man that he was. Clark describes the effect for us, stating that its discipline created in him a deep suspicion of authority in general, and of educational authority in particular. This feeling lasted all his life. Without qualification, it taught him the virtues of skepticism. It encouraged him to question and to doubt, always valuable qualities in a scientist. Yet there is no doubt that the discipline which it attempted to instill in the young man was absolutely necessary to succeed as a scientist. It also made him hate the Germans. Clark writes that the Luitpold Gymnasium, as he looked back on it, equaled ruthless discipline, and the Luitpold Gymnasium was German. Thus, the boyhood hardships became transformed into the symbol of all that was worst in the German character, a transformation that was to produce dire and ironic consequences later on in his life. The teachers there had made him detest discipline, but under his guard they had taught him the virtues of self-discipline, of concentration, of dedication to an ideal, of an attitude which can be described as firm or as relentless according to taste. He had learned the soft skills that are at the heart of the modern-day education system. In a world where the answer is always one search away on our phone, the true purpose of education, in my humble opinion, is in transferring, practicing, and perfecting the soft skills that will allow our students the chance to succeed in life. If that is the bar that you judge education by, then the Luitpold Gymnasium excelled. For by the time of his expulsion, Albert Einstein had already begun the first version of his theory of relativity, after having thought deeply on the subject of light. He would get far enough along in the work to send a copy to his maternal uncle before he headed off to university, willing to once again subject himself to the harsh world of education. He needed to take such a step because he had found his purpose in life, his why. the thing that would center him for the rest of his days. Einstein was searching for God. Not in the literal sense, of course. Einstein's God was, in the words of Clarke, even more intangible and impersonal than a celestial machine minder, running the universe with undisputable authority and expert touch. Instead, Einstein's God appears as the physical world itself, operating at an atomic level with the beauty of a master craftsman's wristwatch, and at stellar level with the majesty of a massive cyclotron. Rather than accepting the scientific doctrines of the era, he had already decided to devote the rest of his days to understanding and explaining how it all worked. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you want to interact with the show, you can email us at resourcesbylowery@gmail.com or on the platform formerly known as Twitter. If you would like to financially support the show, please look in the description for more information. As always, thank you for listening, rating the show, and spreading the word.